Hey guys, it's Daniel. Welcome back. If you're new to my channel, please make sure to subscribe. I have a lot of Nirvana related videos here, including my interviews with Steve Albini, Jack Endino, and many others. Now, yesterday I released a video called New Nirvana. And the premise of that video essentially was me asking various artists and people within the business, do you think it's possible for there to be a new band that has the same effect Nirvana did on the music industry? Obviously, since Nirvana, there have been some huge bands like Linkin Park, System of a Down, Tool. But the thing about Nirvana is that Nirvana completely flipped the music business on its head. There hasn't really been a band that has had that kind of a singular, massive effect on the business, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many people. Not to put any of those other huge bands down, I'm just saying objectively, Nirvana really had a unique effect on the business. Now, thinking about that, I got to wondering, okay, instead of a new Nirvana, what if Nirvana actually reunites? Obviously, without Kurt Cobain, there can't ever be a full Nirvana reunion, but Dave Grohl, Krist, Novoselic, and Pat Smear have reunited on various occasions over the past several years, including earlier in 2020. The question is, would there ever be a full-time Nirvana reunion? And how would it look like? For example, I think that if there is ever to be a Nirvana reunion, Chad Channing should absolutely be involved. The fact that Chad Channing was not inducted into the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, is totally not fair. Because Chad, for those who may not be familiar, Chad Channing was the drummer from Nirvana from parts of 1988 to 1990. He's on their first studio album, Bleach, and he was involved for Nevermind. So that, in addition to the fact that he was with the band during what was arguably their most difficult time when they were traveling Europe in a small van and going through different places in America and sleeping on people's floors in their houses, he went through a lot, and I really think he should have been inducted. And I do think that if there is some kind of a Nirvana reunion, he should absolutely be involved. But then, of course, Dave Grohl is the drummer. So how would we work with Chad Channing? Would Chad Channing be featured on maybe a couple of songs? Or could you have something unique like maybe Chad drums, you have Pat on guitar, Krist Novoselic on bass, and then Dave Grohl is actually singing? I don't think that would happen, but it's a cool thought to have. Now, of course, if Chad Channing were to be involved with a Nirvana reunion, then the question in my mind at least becomes, do you also include Aaron Burkhardt, or Dan Peters, or Dave Foster, or Dale Crover, the other drummers from the early part of Nirvana? I think that they could have a lot of fun with it because there are the Nirvana family, so to speak. It's rather large. People often think that it's just, Kurt, Dave, and Krist, but really, there were a lot of people involved with Nirvana. I think it would be a really touching, cool tribute in a way to Kurt to have all the people that were involved with the different stages of Nirvana come together for some sort of reunion. I just think that there is room for something out there. Now, if you look at Nirvana's history post Kurt Cobain with all these one-off reunions they've had, there has always been a guest singer of sorts involved with these performances. So if there's going to be a reunion, who would they bring in? Who would you like to see perform with Nirvana if that were to ever happen? And if there ever was a reunion, would it simply be for live shows and for touring? Or could we ever see any new music from Nirvana? I think that's highly unlikely, but a cool thought that crossed my mind earlier today is, what if they take some of Kurt Cobain's unfinished demos and make those into studio recordings? There is somewhat of an ethical fine line there, of course. For example, I love Do Re Mi, and part of the reason that Do Re Mi I think is so haunting is because it's a demo of just Kurt playing his guitar and singing, and it doesn't have the greatest recording quality, but that actually gives it some sort of, it gives it a special feel. And I think that perhaps if they were to actually re-record some of those songs, some people would probably feel uncomfortable doing that, of course, and it might take away from what is special about the demos. But it's just a thought. I think Nirvana today is as relevant as ever. And especially with the internet and how everyone from anywhere in the world can just discover them at any time and research them and listen to songs they may not have heard of before, I honestly think that Nirvana, in many ways, is as relevant as ever. And with the example of the Guns N' Roses reunion tour, you even have Motley Crue now coming back with Def Leppard and this huge stadium tour. There are many examples of, these bands that have been out of it for many years coming back and blowing up. Obviously, Nirvana's case is a bit different. The main focal point of the band passed away many years ago. But if there ever was to be a Nirvana reunion, it would be absolutely massive. That I think we can all pretty much agree on. Now, obviously, when it comes to the topic of a potential Nirvana reunion, one of the first things a lot of people point out to is, would it just be a money grab? You know, would it be tarnishing the memory of Nirvana and of Kurt to actually have a reunion nowadays? It would totally be a money grab in a lot of people's opinions. And of course, you know, if there were to be a tour or a reunion, it would make a ton of cash. That's not even debatable. Everyone knows that would happen. So would it be a money grab? I think it would. I think it would depend on how it would be marketed and how it would be, you know, publicized, so to speak. Like, if it's very clearly made just for the sake of cashing in, then yeah, I do understand how that would leave a bad taste in some people's mouths, for sure. But I do think that it is possible to have a reunion while still preserving the integrity of the band and of Kurt Cobain. I do believe that. You know, for example, I went to the Metallica concert in Toronto a few years back, and it was in the Rogers Centre Skydome, which is Toronto's huge, like 55,000 seat baseball stadium. And Metallica, behind the stage, they had a massive screen. I think they have it pretty much at every one of their concerts lately. You can see it online. It's the giant 3-piece screen with the M and the A sticking out at the sides. And on that screen, at one point, they had a video of Cliff Burton playing. He was playing Anesthesia, I believe, and then it cut into For Whom the Bells Toll. And it was amazing. The crowd was cheering for Cliff Burton, and you felt he was there. If Nirvana were to ever have some sort of reunion, they could definitely do something like that. They could even have it go on throughout the whole concert in one way or another. So I do think that there are ways the surviving members of Nirvana can reunite while still respecting the memory of Kurt. And I think maybe possibly a cool way to do that, you know, going back to Kurt's unreleased demos, would be maybe to have, you know, a few times throughout a potential concert where the band members get off the stage, you just see the screen, and it's just, you know, maybe it's a video of Kurt performing one of his old demos that have not been made into studio recordings. I think that could be a really intimate thing. You know, obviously with the topic of Nirvana, you can't detach Kurt Cobain's DNA from Nirvana. Many people would argue that Kurt Cobain is Nirvana, period. So how could you have a Nirvana reunion without Kurt Cobain? That's a fair question to have. But I do think that there are certain ways you can possibly have a Nirvana reunion with still respecting his memory, whether it's through video or maybe even a hologram projection. I mean, that's getting really big nowadays. They are developing, you know, holograms of major artists who are no longer around, because those artists are still as relevant as ever. I mean, look at Queen and Freddie Mercury. Since the release of Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie, about a couple of years ago, I mean, that band has always been relevant, but they've become even more so now. I just think that there are so many examples of, you know, vintage bands, so to speak, that have been able to get back into the mainstream consciousness. And Nirvana is still there, really. And if Nirvana was to reunite in some way, it would become even more so. And I think it could possibly, hopefully, even spark some sort of a rock revival. I do believe that in the 2020s, there will be a rock revival to a certain extent. I think people are starving for new, great rock and roll. And I think that having bands get back together like Guns N' Roses and having potentially a Nirvana reunion, that would be a great thing for the rock and roll atmosphere. I personally would love to see some sort of a Nirvana reunion. Again, I know there are people who don't feel that way though, and that's fair. But this is a debate I think that, you know, us Nirvana fans should have respectfully. And, you know, it's an interesting topic for sure, especially because, again, Nirvana is still super relevant. You could make the argument they're more relevant now than ever before, especially because of the internet and how anyone in the world can discover them at any moment in time. So what is possibly stopping a reunion from happening? I'm sure that, you know, it's definitely, a lot of it has to do with emotions, and that's totally understandable, of course. So these are just my thoughts. I'd love to get your thoughts as well, because this is something that many Nirvana fans have thought about for many years. What would a possible Nirvana reunion look like? Should there even be a Nirvana reunion? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Please subscribe if you already haven't. If you want to see more Nirvana videos, there's going to be a lot more coming, and thank you for watching.